Hey guys, I'm going to show you how to use Photopea today, which is a great substitute for Photoshop or even Illustrator while you're home. It's very similar to the Adobe program, so I think you'll be very comfortable with picking this up right away. First, name your project Mini Project 1 for week 1, and make sure it's at a height of width of 13 by 19 or lower and dots per inch of 300. You can set your background as white, but there's also a lot of great templates that come free and are all separate images. So if you look at your layers palette, it actually divides each of those pieces into separate layers for you automatically. And any imagery that it gives you as vector images, it actually has them divided into separate pieces. If I click on the bird by itself, you can use your move tool just like Photoshop to move it around, but also if I click on an individual piece of it, like you can see as the body there, I can move that around, or if there's any unnecessary pieces I don't want, I can go through and delete them individually. Okay, and just like in Photoshop or Illustrator, you can create new layers as to not move or change anything on the layers below, as well as hide and rearrange your layers as needed. So I just created a new layer above the bird so far, and I'm using my pen tool, which functions just like Illustrator, to click and drop anchor points. Remember, if you click and drop, it creates straight lines, but if I click and pull those anchor points, they're gonna turn into curves. I can connect back to that beginning anchor point to close my shape, but it is a vector image, so I can't just use my paint bucket to change the color of it. I do need to right click on it on my layers palette and make sure it is a rasterized layer to be able to change that color. I can use my brush tool just like in Photoshop. Use your bracket keys to make it bigger or smaller. Notice the different options at the top of the screen there. You can change the size, the fuzziness of the edge. So right now it's a little bit too fuzzy. I'm going to go ahead and change it to a harder edge brush, okay, and adjusting it there. You can change the opacity if you want to stack things on top of each other, how smooth the brush is itself as the movements go. So I'm going to add the eye, the base of the eye. Notice that each piece that I'm adding are going on to that same layer, layer 2 that's highlighted on my layers palette. If I do want to have any of these pieces drawn separately, I do have to make a new layer for each one. Now in the eyes case, I really don't need them as separate pieces. There's no use for that. So stacking them on top of each other, as long as I'm doing them in the correct order, is completely fine. Now let's go back to our pen tool that I just showed you. Okay, again, it works just like Illustrator. If I click and drag, I'm going to be able to create those nice curves. You can always go back with the tool right below to move and rearrange or curve your anchor points once you're done. So if you don't like where something is, it's still free to go back and adjust that. Okay, so I'm going to go around making nice curves and then connect back with a single click back to my beginning anchor point. Again, guys, I have to rasterize my layer before I can drop in that color. I can go to my paint bucket. If I want to use one of the colors from the palette, I can do it from there, or I can always use my eyedropper tool to grab a color from a different part of the page if I want something to look unified and repeating that same color. You can always merge your layers together, so if I created multiple shapes that are all part of the same thing, you can always merge those layers down or merge them together on your layers palette. But the next thing I'm going to show you is how to burn and dodge. The burn tool looks like the little hand. I can adjust my exposure down very low, so it's a nice fuzzy brush. I'm just doing little bits at a time. Notice that it's adding a nice shadow. If you're going to do this as an effect to any of your designs, make sure you think about the light source first. Think about where the light is coming from and make sure your shadow is always on the same side of any object that's within the page. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to the eye. Notice my shadows are always going to be on the bottom right-hand corner, so my light source is coming from the top left-hand corner of my page. Okay, so I'm adding that nice shadow, same spot as the wing, to the bottom of the eye. Okay, after that, I'm going to go to my next layer, the mouth. Now, if I notice that the color that I chose is not working, there's a few options to make sure that it's going to work for you to add those shadows and highlights. Number one, if you're seeing that it's not coloring, I would definitely check your layers palette, which is the issue in this case. But if you go to your midtones or shadows, maybe the color that the program is viewing it as is seeing it more as a shadow or a highlight or a midtone. So it might affect it better if you change that. You can also adjust the amount of exposure. Now this is the real giveaway. If you see that your exposure is way up and nothing is happening, then you're probably not on the right spot. So see, if I go back to that layer 1 where I meant to be coloring, I can then adjust my exposure to what it's supposed to be. And then color it very nice and softly in that bottom right hand corner, just like I did on my other shapes. Again, think about where that light source is hitting. Only add the shadow where the light is not touching your object. Okay, and my last one, the body, again, it needs to be rasterized before I can adjust it at all, just like dropping the paint. And I can go ahead and add in that shadow on the bottom right hand corner to right side of the bird. A little shadow under the wing to show that the wing is actually sticking out and away from the bird's body, so it doesn't look as flat of an image. Think about anything that would cast a shadow onto the ground or on anything that's around it. Okay, and then I can go to my dodge tool and do the exact opposite. So think about where the strongest highlights are, where that light source is going to be hitting your bird itself or object that you're drawing, and on each separate layer, again, I can go through and add in those highlights, making your brush bigger or smaller, using the bracket tools for any fine details that you want to add in particular in the eye. You want to think about where the little part of the iris, the color of the eye would be glowing where the light's hitting it, gives it that nice realistic look. Okay, and last to the wing, same thing, just up in that top right hand corner. I'm going to go through and add just a little bit of that light source hitting it to give it that three-dimensional look that I'm going for. Really nice illustration type style here, kind of like any Pixar motion picture that you would see like Finding Nemo, right? It kind of has that cartoon but yet three-dimensional effect to it. Again, notice the different brush options we have, so if you don't like any of them that just basically come with it, you can always install the ones that are on the right-hand side. You can adjust your text in more detail over on the right side as well. So using my type tool, I can go through then and choose the fonts that I want. Just double click on the font on the menu here, and it's going to automatically install it into the program. So find one you want, double click on it, and then I can start typing. Remember, as in any of the other programs, you really don't want to click and drag a text box unless you really want your text to fit in a certain location. You can always enter down to the next line. So let me do that one more time. Again, grabbing the type tool, it automatically makes a new layer for you, so you don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to click and let go and start typing. Don't really want to drag text box unless you really have a specific reason for it. So I can go ahead and type with this font and font size that I chose on that menu that I just pulled up and showed you on the right hand side. Also notice that there's the same option, just a little bit less up at the top of the screen, where it gives you the type of font, the style of the font, as well as the size and color so that you can adjust that quickly. But going back to that menu gives you a lot more options. If I type a line of text, you can change just one single word or multiple words if you highlight them. So I can change the color here. I can change the font to a different font just for that word below. Ooh, I don't really like how that looks together, but just to show you, right, it's a very different font than the original one that I had. You can use your move tool to move that entire box of text around on your page as well, as it is on a separate layer. Okay, so our other tools, you still have your lasso tools, your marquee tools, you have your selection tools, which if you want to, as long as you have a separate layer, if you want to grab a specific piece, I can click the background behind it and go to select inverse, and it's going to select specifically just that piece that was not part of the background. I can crop my documents. I can use the eyedropper tool to grab any specific color to make sure it's unified, our healing brush tools to take anything out of an image, our brush or pencil to actually draw, our clone stamp where we made that fun horse earlier in the year, our eraser, paint bucket to blur or sharpen an image, to dodge or burn, which we just went over, to add type, and then of course your pen tool and to adjust your anchor points right below it, and your color palette sits all the way at the bottom of your page. So once again, guys, I think this is a great option instead of having to download Photoshop, which I know a lot of you guys can't do because you have the Chromebooks. This is almost exactly the same thing. You can really use it as an Illustrator substitute while you're home too. The only problem is it's not going to be a vector image as we're saving it like we're used to.